Number 10. Number 10 is talking about the domain and the range. The fancy term for domain is the fancy term for your x values, right? We had a list of ordered pairs where we listed the domain, we listed all our x values. Range is your fancy name for your y values. Well, we're going to do the domain and the range using interval notation. So from where to where on my graph? So think about the domain as going from the left to the right. If I'm doing the domain of this graph, my farthest left value is this point right here. It has an x value of -3. My graph is continuous until right here. The end of this graph has an x value of 5. So my domain goes from -3 to 5. I don't have anything back here on my graph. I don't have anything over here on my graph. The -3 has a filled in dot. I am touching the graph at that point. I use the bracket. Bracket means you're equal to that value. Parenthesis means you're not equal to that value. So over here I have an open circle. I'm not touching at that point. I have a parenthesis. The range of my graph. The range is the y values, but when I look at the range, I want to go from smallest to largest, so I think about it going bottom to top. The bottom of my graph, the very bottom point, is right here. The y value of that bottom point is -5. Again, my graph is continuous. It goes up to here. This is the very highest point on my graph. The top point of my graph has a y value of 4. Again, this end has a filled in dot. It's going to have the bracket. This end has an open circle. It's going to have a parenthesis. Now when you're doing the domain and the range, the endpoints aren't necessarily going to be your answers. Sometimes you're somewhere in the middle of the graph, so you want to think left to right for the domain, bottom to top for the range, not necessarily the ends. So if we look at number 11, we want to start with our domain. And so we're going left to right. The farthest left point on my graph is this one. The x value of that left point, -2. The farthest to the right point is this one right here. The x value of that point, 5. The -2 has an open circle, going to have a parenthesis. The 5 has the filled in dot, going to have a bracket. Range of my graph. On the range of my graph, I'm going from the bottom to the top. Bottom point on my graph, right here, has a y value of -4. The top of my graph, this point's up on the top, has a y value of 2. Again, this one had a filled in dot, so at the -4, I'm going to have a bracket. This one has an open circle, even though I scribbled all over it, it's going to have the parenthesis. And always going from smallest to largest, bottom to top if you're doing the range. One more of those. If we look at number 12, doing the domain and the range. So again, the domain, we're going from the left to the right. The farthest to the left point is this one right here. It has an x value of -3. Farthest to the right point, this one over here, it has an x value of +3. This one had a filled in dot, going to be a bracket. This one has an open circle, going to be a parenthesis. Now here's the one that's a little trickier on this one. If I do my range is the bottom to the top. Here is my bottom of my graph, -4. Here is the top of my graph, right? There's nothing higher than that. positive 5. Here, am I including this point? Well, there's not a hole in my graph. It's a solid dot. They just didn't put dot, 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 dot all the way through. So yes, I am touching my graph at this point. I'm going to have a bracket. Same thing when I think about this one. If I would draw a line, am I touching the graph at all? Yes, I am touching the graph at that point. Also going to have a bracket. If these were both open circles, then I would have a parenthesis, but if either of them is filled in, I'm going to be touching the graph at that point. It is going to be a filled in circle, so I am going to have a bracket. So only way you're not going to have that bracket is if they're both open circles. I'm not touching.